on as a process of modernization. The founding figures of sociology were interested in trying to think about what is this change, how do we understand it, from Marx and Weber, Durkheim, and Simmel. They all had their own approach to these phenomena. Modernization is not a single thing. It is a multifaceted thing. It takes many different forms, and these emerge at different paces in different places. But one defining aspect of modernization is urbanization. The historical movement of rural populations to urban centers. Some were drawn to urban centers, many were driven to urban centers by the enclosure movement. But this is a defining phenomena of modernity, is the movement from rural to urban. This was a remarkably monumental and a remarkably fast transformation. In England and Wales, a proportion of the population living in cities with more than 20,000 people jumped from 17% in 1801 to 54% in 1891. That's less than a century. And we continue to see this change unfolding. This is not something that has stopped. In 2008, the United Nations estimated that half of the world's population was living in an urban area. It predicted that by 2050, about 64% of the developing world and 86% of the developed world would be urbanized. Beyond happening quickly, urbanization also had monumental social and political implications. Urbanization was not just a change in where people lived. Urbanization changed almost everything about human existence. It destroyed craft guilds, it gave rise to new forms of commerce, provided a reserve army of labor for emerging capitalism. It changed how people raised their children, how they found their partners. There was almost nothing about urbanization, there was almost nothing about Western society that wasn't changed by urbanization. It gave rise to the rapid transmission of disease. It facilitated new networks of interconnection that allowed for the emergence of science. We're talking about a very large and very interconnected phenomenon. Why am I telling you this? It's because I think that this is how we should conceptualize surveillance. I think that the context surveillance is not about the introduction of new technologies anymore, if it ever was. Essentially, it is now about a wholesale historical transformation in the dynamics of social life. And it is changing our modes of existence. And while its development shows some similarities in different contexts, it's also something that is unfolding unevenly across the globe. This is not a uniform phenomenon, but it is a consistent phenomenon. And I think we are in very stark need of new models and new language to understand, to think about the enormity of this transformation. The metaphors and concepts we have simply no longer work. This is not just about Orwell and Big Brother. This is not just about Foucault and Panopticon. Those give us a slice into some aspects of surveillance, but they don't give us any sense of the whole picture. Scholars such as David Lyon have talked about the rise of a surveillance society to talk about the enormity of this change. For me, talking about a surveillance society, I think is kind of too undifferentiated, it's too uniform, and it's kind of not very historic. So when I'm taking an inspiration from urbanization. I don't have it here. I'm taking an inspiration from urbanization to talk about a horrible word that I'm introducing, surveillanceization. And hopefully no one ever uses that word, because it is an awful word. But what makes it different is that it's a verb. Okay? It is a verb, and it shows us a process. The language of surveillance is too static. We need to think about a wholesale change in society akin to urbanization. And we're in the midst of a wholesale historical change that because we are living in it, it's hard for us to understand. It's often hard for people to understand the scope of change that they're seeing during their lifetime. But as different aspects of social life become more transparent to other people, but also crucially to organizations, everything is poised to change, and it is changing already. Surveillance will, and it is, changing how we fight our wars, how we find our spouses, how we police and how we resist policing, how we both destroy and protect the environment, how we raise our children, how we treat offenders, how we conduct science, how we secure borders, how we identify criminals. It's hard to envision a realm of existence that is not touched by surveillance. So it's a big topic because it's a big phenomenon, and it's become central to many different social and political debates. So what I want to try and do in my time here is to really just do a high-level kind of discussion about these are some of the trends in the dynamics of surveillance, and we can identify others, but that's what I'm going to do. And the first is the most obvious, but maybe the most important, and it's expansion and intensification. Now, when I talk about surveillance, I'm increasingly reminded of discussions that I have with my collaborator, Sandra. Sandra has a 10-year-old boy who is a genius. Not a genius like everyone. We all think our children are geniuses, but he is a genius. He is a real genius. And he's very interested in space and space exploration. And you talk to him, and it's interesting and it's challenging because talking about space is almost impossible to understand when you start talking about time and distance. It's almost impossible to get your head around the language to speak about this. And for me, sometimes it's the same thing happens when you start talking about surveillance, and you're at, well, how much is there? So that's why I'm going to try and give you some examples of how much there is. So a series of quick examples. So you might have seen a movie, news clip this year by the BBC, John Sudworth. He's a journalist, and he was in China. And they did an experiment, some of you might have seen this. He put his face on the facial recognition system in China in a city of several million people, and they tried to find him, and they found him in 7 minutes. China is leading the way now in terms of the integration of surveillance cameras, biometric facial recognition, and artificial intelligence. So you have this thing I've talked kind of before about, this assemblage, this coming together of lots of different technologies. China is, things change over the years. At one point we were concerned about the United States and then England, and now China is leading the way. But there's concerns here. The second example is a database in the United States. It's called NCIS. Part of that database has fingerprints on it. And fingerprints are interesting because fingerprints used to be very localized. It was ink and paper, and you had an expert, a man or woman who would look at this and try and make matches. It was very geographically specific. That has changed dramatically with computerization, and particularly the ability to search. Fingerprints are now digital, and they can be searched very easily on systems. And I think, to my knowledge, the record in terms of the United States for searches occurred in 2012, when in one 24-hour period, one day in the United States, security agencies searched 3 million unique individuals in the United States. That's 1% of the entire American population was searched on this database alone in one 24-hour period. Third example is the NSA in the United States. NSA is the National Security Agency. It used to be that NSA in English stood for no such agency, because when you asked about it, the authorities said there's no such agency. Now we do know that it exists, particularly after Snowden